It's time to go down memory lane and talk about 5 of the best retro Legend of Zelda games on today's Do You Remember? Retro gamers, and welcome back to another episode of Do You Remember? And today we have our Zelda special because Breath of the Wild's sequel, Tears of the Kingdom, just released today, and what better way to celebrate that release than talking about the fantastic retro games in the Zelda series that made the franchise the way it is. The first Legend of Zelda released on February 21st, 1986. And over the past 37 years, we have been given so many amazing Legend of Zelda games that we can all agree have had some ups and downs, some not so great, some pretty freaking amazing, and are some of the best video games ever made. As a fan of Legend of Zelda, I love every Legend of Zelda game that I've ever played. From the top-down perspective, retro-style games from the NES and SNES, all the way to the modern 3D games that we got from the N64 and GameCube era. And because the Legend of Zelda series is so long, there's no way that I could do an entire episode just talking about all these games because we would be here a while, and honestly, it's not going to be that helpful to go through all of them because some of them aren't as great as others, and plus, I want to do future episodes of this show, so we may talk about other of those games later down the line. But today I'm going to talk about my personal favorite 5 games in the Legend of Zelda series that I personally think are worth remembering today. We cannot talk about Legend of Zelda without talking about the game that started it all. The story of Legend of Zelda takes place like the most of the games in its series, with Hyrule being engulfed in chaos and taken over by the Prince of Darkness, Ganon. Ganon controls the Triforce of Power and is out to control the other 2 Triforce pieces, which are held by Zelda and Link. The Legend of Zelda series story is iconic, and though it changes slightly throughout the series, the main concepts are still there. The Legend of Zelda incorporates several different elements of action, adventure, and role-playing. Most of the first few games in the series featured an overhead world perspective that focused on your traveling a large outdoor map with multiple dungeons to explore. At the beginning of the game, you start off with very little to protect yourself with, and then you unlock new items as you go along, and allows you to make your time playing Legend of Zelda a little bit easier. Dungeons are the biggest part of the game, as there are 8 of them that you will explore that have secret passages with monsters to face, puzzles you'll have to solve, and mini bosses as well. And then of course each dungeon has its own boss battles that must be defeated to progress onward, all leading to Ganon, who is the biggest enemy you will face in the game. Several of the earliest games in the series have this similar concept that this video game presents. And to this day, Legend of Zelda is one of the best versions of this style and can be played on the NES Online service right now, along with several other games in Legend of Zelda series that launched from the NES all the way to the N64. Alright, so I know the Legend of Zelda for the NES is what started the series, but what truly evolved Legend of Zelda to be what it is today started with The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time was the first game that took a 3D approach to this series, and not only did that, but improved the experience by making gameplay changes and removing the top-down perspective, which made Ocarina of Time a unique game in the series. The action-adventure elements were still there, but it improved substantially with the graphics of the N64. The story this time focuses on Ganondorf, the evil Gerudo King, who is seeking the Triforce just like his other timeline self, but this time he claims all the pieces and incapacitates Link. 7 years later, Link awakens to a destroyed Hyrule, and Link has to work with Sheik, who we all know as Zelda in the end, and explains that he has to gather the 5 sages who are basically childhood friends of his who've grown up, and then have to go face Ganondorf. Ocarina of Time also uses a new mechanic using an ocarina to play specific songs that will help with solving puzzles and calling Epona and so many other things. You will learn over the course of the game that you will need to learn these new songs and use them at the right times to finish different dungeons and so on and so forth. But the combat itself has been so improved over the original games as an upgrade completely from the original Zelda series. Using the sword and shield to block attacks and take down enemies is so rewarding, and it honestly feels like a one-of-a-kind game that we didn't have at that time. In the N64, this was such a brand new experience. Now, today's time, it's probably not as impressive, but we didn't have this game at that time, and it really pushed the series forward into what it would be today. The exploration of Ocarina of Time is so unique, as there is many ways to embrace yourself within the world. The boss battles and dungeons are also iconic, and the Water Temple is still considered to be one of the most difficult ones to complete. But just like the original game, you can play this game on the Nintendo Switch, on the N64 service, or you can play the remake on the 3DS, which was my favorite way of enjoying this game. And it might not have been the first way I've played this game, but it was actually the first time I beat the game was on the 3DS. Either way, 3DS or the N64 emulator on Switch, you can't go wrong with playing this original game in the series. And we cannot talk about Ocarina of Time without talking about its direct sequel, the Majora's Mask. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is arguably called one of the best video games ever made. Most of the assets are the same, as the graphics are similar and the concept of dungeon puzzles and the ocarina songs are kept the same from the previous game, but it includes new character transformations and a 3-day cycle. The story takes place after Link returns to the childhood timeline at the end of Ocarina of Time. Upon returning, he enters Termina, which is a world stuck in a constant 3-day cycle where the moon will soon crash land into the world. For Link to be able to stop this, he'll have to figure out this 3-day cycle and stop the Skull Kid, who is all behind this. The most unique element that comes from Majora's Mask is the horror feel that the game has, and how they reimagine the world that they created to be a darker version of itself. You have the same gameplay mechanic and combat and traversal movements as the original, but in Majora's Mask, Link will have access to unique masks that will be used to help solve puzzles. These masks literally change the way the game plays, and you'll have to figure out which transformation you will need to complete certain puzzles. Link can also collect fairies in this game that will help improve his abilities as well as upgrade his attacks. And I just loved every last bit of the darkness that Majora's Mask offered. And I enjoyed this game so much because it truly felt different from what the other Legend of Zelda games had at its time. And to this day, Majora's Mask is still a very iconic game that I believe is probably the most memorable game in the series. Another Legend of Zelda game that's considered to be one of the greatest video games ever made is one of the best GameCube games that was ever made as well, and that was The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. Wind Waker popularized the Toon Link character, which was featured in 2 other games in the series. Wind Waker has an open world with a similar action-adventure gameplay that we are all familiar with, but the biggest difference is the gorgeous cartoon design that is vibrant and more colorful than any of the other games. This is a complete polar opposite to Majora's Mask, as Majora's Mask was the darkest we could get the game to look at its time, and Wind Waker was a beautiful, bright, vibrant world that we had not seen from The Legend of Zelda. A unique element used for Wind Waker is the ocean and ability to sail the seas. You have many islands to explore and continue the story, and there are several dungeons to solve puzzles and make your way through, as you usually face a boss at the end. But Wind Waker also features side quests that are enjoyable distractions from the main game that honestly were necessary to make the game feel fuller. But sailing with the boat is probably the biggest change that the game has, but the driving can take a little bit to get used to. But as you go, you can collect treasures using a cane on the ship. The story of Wind Waker is similar to the other games, but Link in this story is basically at the start of his coming of age, and is asked to wear the tunic of the hero because they are hoping one day the hero will return to save the world. Zelda in this series is less of a princess and has a more direct role in the story than in previous games, and I really like that they changed it up a little bit, making her a little bit different than what her previous self is. But Link is the biggest change in this because he is so savage. And this savagery is not really made apparent until the end of the game when he impales Ganondorf in the face. Which, let's be honest, is probably the most violent thing that any other game in this series has done. For me, this game's art style and gameplay mechanics alone set itself separate from the other games in the series and is probably at the front of the line as one of the best video games in the series. And when it comes to the last game on this series, guys, I cannot say how much I really love this game, as it was truly the first Legend of Zelda game that I beat and fully played all the way through, and really showcased to me how amazing the Legend of Zelda series was. But I truly found my love for Legend of Zelda with Twilight Princess. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess features a teenage version of Link whose entire world is turned upside down when the village is attacked and the children are taken. Link pursues them and encounters a wall of twilight that he gets pulled inside of and is turned into a wolf. A twilight entity named Midna wants him to work with her to save the world. When Link encounters Zelda, he realizes that Hyrule is in danger and Ganondorf is responsible. Who would have guessed? The world of Twilight Princess is gorgeous, and the dark design of the world is beautiful, and it is the most impressive world in Legend of Zelda released at its time. I love the aesthetic of this game, and I loved every dungeon, boss battle, and so much more. Twilight Princess did feel like the upgrade to Majora's Mask with the world design and the enemies, and the way that the game designed its whole entire story felt a little bit of an improvement to that horror aesthetic that Majora's Mask started. But Link in this game has a wolf form, as we mentioned before, which is my favorite part of this game because I enjoyed the transformation element, and it was a way to change up the combat and the gameplay, and just the overall dungeons and the boss battles are just so memorable. You know, I enjoyed just being able to explore the entire world from the Yeti and the snowy mountain areas all the way up to the final iconic battle with Ganondorf, which is probably one of my favorite boss battles in the Legend of Zelda series. The gameplay, of course, was pretty much similar to the rest of the 3D series, but there are improvements that were made to make the game feel so much more better in combat. They also added a new feature where you use the jar that you could capture fairies or make recipes in. There was a secondary thing that you could use in the game mechanics. And like I said before, the wolf form is the most unique thing about it, that it allowed you to get rid of the sword, get rid of the shield, and just bite the shit out of things. And then there was also the fact that you can use the wolf's ability to scent trails, and you could follow things to be able to make your way through some of the game, which was required at times to further progress through the story. But the memories I have playing this game brings me back to my teenage years, and I have the most nostalgia playing the GameCube Zelda games more than any of the other games in the series, which is why I am a big fan of Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, and a port to the Switch would be very appreciated. Thank you guys for going down this nostalgia road trip with me and talking about some of the best Legend of Zelda games that have ever been released. I hope you enjoyed today's video, guys, and if you have a suggestion for a video game that you would like to see on an episode of Do You Remember, comment below, because every single week, one of the games on that list for that week's episode of Do You Remember will be an audience-based answer. So comment below, what is a game you guys want to talk about, want to see, want to hear about, want to go down memory lane and talk about, and you may just see your game suggestion on an episode of Do You Remember in the near future. I would greatly appreciate it if you also, while you're at it, like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we make video game content like this one every single week. But I will see you guys next time, because I have plenty of games to play, especially the new Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. It just came out today. I got it last night at midnight, but I hope you guys stick around, and I am going to go play some Legend of Zelda right now because I am very excited, and it's not going to play itself. So I'll see y'all next time.